You are about to listen to an exclusive conversation with Paul Markovich. He is the CEO of Blue Shield in California, which is a healthcare company with over 7,000 employees. Paul is one of the over 100 CEOs that I interviewed for my brand new book, Leading with Vulnerability, which basically goes over why leaders should not be vulnerable at work, but instead, they should lead with vulnerability, which is about bridging together competence and connection. As Adam Grant said, this is a thoughtful resource on how leaders can be more candid about their foibles and fears without sacrificing their effectiveness. And if you want to learn how to bring vulnerability inside of your organization for leaders, then this is the book for you, according to Adam Grant. So hopefully that will entice you to grab a copy, which you can do at leadwithvulnerability.com. What you're going to listen to now is the first part of the interview with Paul. If you want to get access to the second part, head over to greatleadership.substack.com. Again, that is greatleadership.substack.com. Hey everyone, my guest today is Paul Markovich. He is the president and CEO of Blue Shield California. Paul, thank you for joining me.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
For people not familiar with Blue Shield of California, what do you guys do and how many employees do you guys have?
Well, we're a large regional health plan. We have about 7,000 employees. We provide health insurance benefits to about 4.7 million Californians. We're a health plan as people I think would normally think about it. We provide healthcare coverage to just about any person that is willing to buy it from us or organization that's willing to buy it from us.
Yeah. And we actually spoke a little bit for my last book, The Future Leader, where we talked about skills and mindsets for leaders. And, the theme of vulnerability came up quite a bit from a lot of the interviews that I did. And so that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today. But why don't we start with just background information about you? You can take us back to baby Paul, maybe where you grew up, how you were raised, and what was your trajectory like to becoming the CEO of Blue Shield California?
Well, it was a dark and stormy night. I was born and raised in Grand Forks, North Dakota. And for those of you that aren't familiar with North Dakota, other than through the movie Fargo, it's like 110,000 square miles and has about 650,000 people living in it. So there's a lot more space than people. I happen to live in the eastern part of the state in the second largest city, which has about 45,000 people. And, my parents taught at the university there, but I was born there all the way through high school there. And in a very tight-knit community and very Midwestern. At any point, if you need me to lapse into my Fargo accent, I can do it for you on command because I grew up speaking that way, and most of the people around me did as well. I also grew up playing hockey, and I still play today, and played competitively in college, and went away to school in Colorado and went to school there and played hockey, and then was fortunate enough to win a Rhodes Scholarship, and so studied abroad. In between college and Oxford, I studied 6 months in Moscow, learning Russian. And
wow, then, I speak Russian.
Молодец.
Yeah, я говорю по-русски. My family's from the Republic of Georgia.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so I at that point I gained a level of fluency, but that was 30 years ago. So I'm a long ways from that now, but it was a great experience. And I went to Oxford, studied there for 2 years, and then started my working career in New York City in a management consulting firm that was called Booz Allen and Hamilton.
Yes, of course I remember them.
Yeah, and I started out in financial services, but then after a couple of years, really just took an affinity towards healthcare and its complexity and how everyone needs to access it. So I started then my last 2 years working in healthcare at Booz Allen and Hamilton, and then my wife, who did her MBA at Stanford, we got engaged while we were in New York, and she said there's only one place in the world to live, and that's the San Francisco Bay Area, and I had never been there. So it became very logical for me to pay a visit, and we did, and we moved out here in 1995 and have not looked back. So I've been out here ever since then, working in healthcare, and all but probably 2.5 years of it when I took an entrepreneurial sabbatical from Blue Shield. I've been working at Blue Shield of California.
Very cool. I used to live in the Bay Area with my wife. We recently moved back to LA last year, and we never thought we would leave the Bay Area because we loved it so much. We lived in Alameda. I don't know if you know where Alameda is.
Yeah, I know. I'm sure.
And then, pandemic happened. All of our friends moved away. Our family was in Southern California, and we kind of looked at each other one day and we're like, why? We have no support here, no community. All of our friends moved. We have no family. Why are we here? And we ended up moving back to LA, which we never thought we would ever do. But it was a big, an important decision, and probably a really good one, because now we have help with our 2 kids. And I can go on date nights again, which is important. So today we're obviously talking about this theme of vulnerability. So when you hear the phrase vulnerable leader, what does that mean to you?
Well, in preparation for this, I actually looked up the word vulnerable and just to see what the definition was. And the one that I found was susceptible to physical or emotional attack or harm.
Yeah.
Or in need of special care and protection because they're at risk of abuse or neglect. So, I mean, the basic concept here is that you are sharing something.
Sorry, I lost you there for a second. Can you repeat what you just said?
Oh, okay.
I heard what you said about the definition, and then you cut out.
Okay, yeah. So the basic idea here to me is that you are sharing something of yourself and exposing it to a person or persons that could be used in a way that is, you could be portrayed or seen as weak, or flawed, maybe even deeply flawed in some way, has the potential to be used against you in some fashion that could be harmful, and you're trusting that person or persons, entrusting them with this information or what you're sharing, that they won't do that, and so it's a pretty important act, I think, for both the person who's doing it and the person or persons that are on the receiving end.
Yeah, and that's actually a big fear for a lot of people when it comes to vulnerability is, I'm going to share something and somebody's going to use it against me. So if that's your kind of the definition of being a vulnerable leader, can you share a time, or do you have any stories or examples of when you had to be vulnerable with someone at work?
Well, I just went through a pretty significant one at the end of 2021. I think everybody went through some very stressful times during the pandemic. I think in many respects, the challenges that I faced and my family faced were, we were very privileged in that time to stay healthy and have access to, food and a home, and not have to venture outdoors very much during a risky time. So in many respects, I'd say the things that we faced as a family were maybe not at the same scale as others did, but at the same time, it was very stressful. I volunteered myself along with other Blue Shield of California employees twice during that time to help the state out, first with COVID testing and then with vaccinations. And the workload was preposterous. It was, for me personally, it was 7 days a week and probably 100-hour weeks, on average for several months.
That's crazy.
Saturday looked like Monday, and it was very intense because we felt like we were trying to save lives, and it was a really important cause, and there was urgency and importance to it. And I feel great about the results that we got, but it took a personal toll on me, and it also affected my family as well. And by the time that I got to the end of 2021, I was certainly personally burned out. But then we also kind of hit an important stress just within my family that was probably the biggest thing that I faced personally, in terms of the highest stress level that I can remember. And so the combination of being, physically and I think mentally and emotionally burned out from work, and then, having all of your reserves and your resilience be down at a very low level, and then be facing this unprecedented, for me at least, emotional challenge personally. It was, I was going through long stretches where I just was barely sleeping and having a hard time just, honestly, like I would cry just about every day. Like I'd knock over a glass of milk and it felt like emotionally devastating. I mean, it's kind of at that point where I could feel that it was hard to sort of keep things together. And so what was happening was it started to come out in challenging. I started to lash out more in meetings when things weren't going the way I wanted them to go. And it was having a really bad impact on my team. And at one point I could tell, I almost had this out of body experience. I could tell I don't want to be saying it this way. I don't want to be doing it this way. And I can't help myself. I just can't stop myself from doing it. And I felt really badly afterwards. And I remember that one of my direct reports called me and talked to me, and I apologized to him for the way that I behaved, and he started to give me feedback about how that made him, feel, and how it just, was not acceptable behavior to him. And I just lost it. I just started, crying on the phone, and I could not stop for quite a while. And he was very good. He gave me the space to talk about it. And I told him, look, this is not an excuse, but I'm going through a lot here. You're right on all those counts, and I need to be better. And I just want to provide you some context about what I'm going through and why it is that I'm showing up this way. I'm not showing up as my best self, and it's, that felt about as vulnerable as I felt in a long time.
Yeah,
having to share a lot of things personally like that, and also then I'd say, Jacob, after that, my coach went and got feedback, and basically the feedback that he was giving me in that moment, I was getting from the rest of the team as well. So then I went through a set of cycles where I was talking to the team about what I was going through, how hard it was, apologizing to them for showing up that way, talking through what I would do about it. So yeah, it was pretty exhausting.
Yeah, no, I can imagine. That's definitely a very, very vulnerable moment, right? When you're crying on the phone, you're talking to somebody, they're telling you stuff, and you just kind of like lose it. And so what was the impact of that, you think, on the other person? So he hears you breaking down, he hears you being emotional, not being your true self. And then what happened to him?
Well, I think that we had enough of a relationship up until then that he always knew that my intentions were good. My behavior was probably not good. Well, it wasn't good, but my intentions were good. And I think this just reinforced that for him, that there was something more going on.
Yeah.
Because we had, challenges or conflicts before, but it wasn't like I was losing it in those situations. So there was clearly some other factors going on, and he was very supportive at the time, also just, and so he certainly made it safe for me to express myself in that way, and which helps.
Yeah, and I would imagine, right? I mean, working 100-hour weeks, probably arguments with the spouse, tough relationship with kids, a lot of stress at home, and it's all just kind of piles on, and it makes it very, very hard. So how come you weren't vulnerable with somebody before that? Like, why did it get to that point, do you think? Like, why couldn't you open up and share that you were struggling and going through these tough times with somebody, 3 months before this happened?
Yeah, well, in hindsight, I probably should have, right? I mean, it's always easier to look back at it at that point. I do think that when you are the CEO, there's, I think, I feel a sense of responsibility and burden not to put burdens on other people. And I do think that it can be very unsettling for people if the CEO himself or herself is unsettled.
Yeah.
It can feel like, oh, maybe the organization isn't going to be, maybe he or she is not going to be around. Like, what does this mean? What does this mean for me? What does it mean for the company? And so I think there's a temptation that I give into probably too often, and maybe others do too, when you're at the top of an organization, to not want to share to that level for fear of creating fear in others about what it might mean for them and for the organization and for their team. So in retrospect, I probably should have. And I really was trying to avoid it for those reasons.
Well, you make an interesting point, because I think leaders are under a tremendous amount of pressure. And kind of like what you were saying is, you don't want to scare other people. You don't want to make other people feel unsettled. But at the same time, that makes it very hard to lead, right? Because if you don't have anybody that you can talk to, open up to at work and share these things with, then it's like, where do you go? So what do you do? What do you see other leaders out there do if sometimes you can't share these things with your people? Or do you think that you can, and it's just you didn't do it?
Well, no, I think that you can. I do think you have to be selective. I mean, if people around you at work think you're going through a therapy session every quarter, they're going to start wondering about you as a leader. I mean, that's just a fact. There's no way around it.
Yeah.
At the same time, to just never be sharing at that level is going to limit your effectiveness as a leader as well. So there's going to be a judgment call about when and how you share things like that with your team members. It can't be 0 and it can't be 100%. But for me, I'd say there's two places that I go, and I've seen others do that too. I mean, I've got an incredible spouse and partner. We've been married for 27 years, and she's...
Congratulations.
I lean on her. Thank you. Yeah, I lean on that relationship heavily, in particularly in tough times. And then there are professionally, that's one of the reasons why they have, chat groups and confidential talk groups with CEOs, because I think you have a chance to share things professionally, things that are challenging or that you really aren't at liberty to share within your organization because you don't have any peers. So having those peer conversations is a safe way to say, well, I'm having this challenge within the team or with my board or something else. And you really don't want to go back to your team and say, well, here's what I have this issue with the board. That is maybe not where you're going to get your best advice. And it runs some of the same risks about going into dynamics. Fortunately, I haven't really had many of those issues myself, but I know a number of my colleagues have based on these meetings.
Yeah.
But that would be an example of having a safe place to share professionally if you can't do it within your own organization.
Do you find leadership sometimes can be a lonely job?
Yes. I don't find it lonely in general, but there are times it's lonely. And I would say the loneliest is when you have to fire a friend. You develop a lot of, you have an obligation as a leader. You have a fiduciary responsibility to do what is in the best interest of that organization. And sometimes what's in the best interest of the organization is to part ways with an individual. And yet you may have developed, really strong affinity for them. And usually I do. Frankly, I talk about love in the workplace a lot because I think that those strong bonds and emotional connections are a part of what can make it a great place to work, part of what can help people bring their best self to work. But when you have to then turn around and when the right thing to do in your job is to ask them to leave, and yet you have this, deep caring for them, it's really lonely because nobody else gets to do it. You can't delegate it. There's no escaping all the emotion that's involved in it. It's the hardest part of the job for sure.
So I'm assuming you've had to fire a friend.
I have.
And is there vulnerability in that?
Oh, there absolutely is. Yeah. I mean, it's because for me, I can't divorce those two things. I can't somehow separate them out. So you show up with your whole self. You have this, this strong feeling for this person. You want them to be you want them to feel good. You want them to be okay.
Yeah.
But the news you're going to share is potentially going to make them not okay. And I fortunately for me, I've never surprised somebody with that news. It just never come out of left field. We've always had multiple conversations leading up to it that have also been usually stressful, and you've had to be vulnerable. But for me, I always just try to show up and be really clear about two things. One is what I think about them as a person and how much I care and respect them as a person, and what I need as a leader of the company from them in the role that they're in and where it's not working. And so, I just do my best to share both of those things. And I'm fortunate in that the vast majority of the time, I've actually managed to maintain really good relationships even after that, but not always.
Yeah, I can imagine. So why is letting go of a friend vulnerable? Like what about that process is vulnerable in terms of like putting yourself out there, because a lot of people might view that as, hey, come into my office, you're fired, I'm sorry, it's not working out. Some people might view letting somebody go as not being vulnerable, as being kind of like automatic. Why is it vulnerable to you, and what does that actually mean during that process?
Well, it's vulnerable to me because you're literally, for me, I don't dwell on it, but I can't help but express how torn I am.
Yeah.
And how hard it is. And frankly, it's hard for them, so I tend to focus more on them. But I've never in my life had a poker face. I will never be a good poker player. I'm always the person who's going to be paying too much into the pot. And people can read me pretty easily, and so I don't try to hide it. It's really clear when people walk in, even if I don't express it out loud, how torn I am, how hard it is for me to do what I'm doing. And that, I think, is where the vulnerability is, at least for me.
Yeah. Why be vulnerable? One of the questions I always ask a lot of CEOs is, we all know a lot of CEOs and leaders out there who are not vulnerable at all, and they make billions of dollars, they have huge successful companies, thousands of employees, and you look at them and you think they're robots.
Yeah.
So why not be like that, Paul? Why share? Why do all the things that you're doing? Why show emotion if you don't have to?
Multiple reasons. One is happiness is priceless, and my life, at least, is so much more rich and joyous in being able to make those human connections with other people, including at work. And you really can't make those deep connections without sharing at a level that makes you vulnerable. So that would be number one. It's a source of joy for me, and I think for others. More practically speaking, in terms of your effectiveness as a leader, there's always a power dynamic when you're at the head of a company. And there's always a level of, for many people, nervousness, fear, because of that power dynamic when they're meeting or seeing or interacting with the CEO. And so when you make yourself vulnerable and you share, it feels safer for people that would otherwise feel maybe less safe in your presence. And their willingness to engage and share and trust you with some things increases. You also become far more relatable as a human being. And I think that sometimes CEOs are seen as caricatures of some sort. Like it's like, no, we get up and, shave and shower and eat. And, this is not really, we got stuff to deal with, just like you've got stuff to deal with. I mean, we are human beings after all. Yeah. But sometimes you sort of get this sense of you're at least within that little sphere, like the 7,000 plus employees for us, you're kind of a celebrity within that small bubble. And you almost get thought of sometimes and treated that way. And so when you can share that way, be vulnerable, people I think, connect with you, see you as more human, and relate to you much more easily. And I would say their comfort level just goes up. So all those things help you be a more effective leader. And I think in the long run, it also creates much more sustainable success with your legacy. Like when you do leave, when someone else takes over, hopefully in the same mold, whatever you put in place kind of stays with people a lot more. Whereas I think for folks that are more robotic, as you described, I think they have a very difficult time having those companies sustain results after they've gone.
Yeah. No, couldn't agree more. Can you think of a time or a story when somebody was vulnerable with you?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's happened in, multiple circumstances where, sometimes it's when people are sharing, they're dealing with their own personal crises. I've had multiple people at work who've either personally gone through major health issues or had spouses and parents go through those health issues and talk to me about their fear. I remember clearly in one case just how much fear and courage one of my team members displayed going through a situation like that. And she talked to me about also the sense of loss experienced by having to go through this, and it ended up taking her away from work for a period of time, and how much of her self-identity was wrapped up in work, and how hard it was to be in a period of time where she had to really identify herself in a different way, and how difficult that was. The circumstances themselves were hard enough, but being able to share that deeply about what it meant for her to be dealing with that challenge, and how the toll that it took on her mentally and emotionally to not be really not be able to work anywhere near the level that she had previously. That was the major vulnerability that I can remember.
Yeah, no, it's a big one. And so when somebody shared their vulnerability with you, what impact did that have on you? Remember, to get access to the second half of this conversation, which is more fascinating and more interesting than the first part, head over to greatleadership.substack.com and you'll be notified as soon as that becomes available. And in the meantime, I hope you decide to pre-order a copy of the book, which you can do at leadwithvulnerability.com. That's leadwithvulnerability.com. And you'll get access to some really amazing and pretty cool bonuses, including an exclusive webinar that I'm going to be hosting, a sneak peek of the book before it becomes available, and also a couple of bonus CEO interviews that we're going to be releasing in the coming weeks. All of that is available, again, at leadwithvulnerability.com. So I hope you enjoyed this conversation. I'll see you next time.